The theme for this video is sanding holes. I found YouTube to be fairly thin when it comes to hole sanding videos, and it's kind of a cool world to be a part of, a world with holes that need to be sanded. This is more about how we see the materials around us to use them to sand holes. So here are some of the things I gathered real quick. First off, the predictable Dremel, the drum sanders, a roll of sticky sandpaper, CA glue, some dirty, dusty Velcro, fine leather, 3M headlight restoration kit, old crummy mouse pad, dowels, various foams, a tent stake piece from a tent that broke, different IKEA parts and bolts and air fitting, little turned piece on the lathe, a circular sander thing, popsicle stick, paintbrush, used sandpaper from the orbital sander, squishy pad, Dremel, hot melt glue, die grinder, and the reciprocating saw. I'm going to go pretty deep into this, so I'm going to split this up into two different videos. Number one will be all about circles, true circles, because that's a different animal than number two, which would be holes that are all squiggly shaped or holes that are square-ish. On this one we have corners, this one we have various profiles, radiuses, radii. This one just one, and we want to keep it just one so it stays a circle. This will be video two, this will be video one. All right, so here are the first holes to sand. Some small ones, medium-size-ish ones, and PVC to represent sort of a large hole. So I'm going to use these to illustrate concepts about how to sand holes that should be uniform quickly, just do a bunch at once and get it done. Now, to be clear, first off, if you just have a couple holes to sand, just grab some sandpaper, do that sort of thing and be done. Or use a Dremel with a drum sander, just get it done. But what I'm talking about is when you have a whole bunch of holes to sand, like the cornhole sets that had 80 holes per set. Times like that, you might want to find a quicker way to do it and keep the circles uniform. So this segment will be about sanding circular holes or circular circles, not square circles, not oddly shaped circles or holes, but in other words, I'm focusing on a real circle here, which means that we probably need something circular to be able to sand that circular. Okay, and it needs to match the hole diameter somehow, because like this here, it doesn't. So if we're sanding a lot of holes like this, chances are we're going to be putting pressure and it's going to become uneven. Not a huge deal for this, but when you start getting into bigger holes, it does become more of an issue. Pre-made products. There are things like this that claim to be sanders for a variety of different size of things. There are inflatable sanders even, and there's custom specialty sandpaper for inflatable sanders, and that is expensive, expensive, expensive. But the idea is there's something about it that flexes or inflates to fill in a sort of cylindrical way to fill the circle you're trying to sand. So the next question, which I hope is obvious, is can we make something to sand the holes in a circular fashion, something that expands in some way to keep that consistent? Yes. Now there are three different types of tool parts to consider as part of this equation. Number one is a thing that spins. That can be a drill, a Dremel, a rotary tool, actually, technically, a Dremel, die grinder, looking around, there's got to be more that spins around, lathe, the drill press, router, not usually, but it does accept a round thing and it does spin, so that would make it eligible if we don't care about safety. It does spin flat out the same speed as the die grinders typically, or roughly within 10 or so thousand RPMs, but it's not as forgiving as die grinders or as air tools. So that's category one, is thing that spins. Now, Category 2 would be something that goes into a thing that spins. So some sort of interface. It could be an unlikely to use Dremel bit that's an interface for the Dremel. A 1/4-inch bolt, 1/4-inch carriage bolt are interfaces for the die grinder. A dowel or a paintbrush has a dowel and a foam part, which we'll use later, so that can go. Now there's a spinning round part there. But basically look around, try and find something that's round. You can make an interface out of wood by making something that's round. And before we get any deeper, I think now's a good time to talk about safety. Sandpaper is not designed to go on some of these tools I'm putting it on, and it was not designed to go at the speeds that I'm going to be using them in some cases. There's probably a reason for that. The adhesive for this 5-inch sandpaper, 40 grit, was not intended to go on a tool that goes 20 or 30,000 RPM. So if you're using this on a tool that goes 20 or 30,000 RPM, you need to make sure that your face is not in the same plane as the direction of travel of the grits that fly off. And if this catches on the wood, that's gonna send the tool flying right back at you. And so you gotta consider these things. So don't just go take the die grinder or any sort of tool that spins and think that you can just attach sandpaper to it. All right, it's go time. Here are some holes. Let's find something that spins and stick some sandpaper on it. The die grinder and a 1/4-inch bolt. This has some texture on it from that marking. Had some texture from that marking. Let's start with something really simple. And we'll watch it fly apart and not really work. Cut a piece, stick it on. These are finger holes for pulling this out of the table saw. It'd be nice to have the inside not splintery and the edge not splintery. This will do it all in one step, because when it goes in, first it's going to put that little micro bevel sort of thing on there as it bends like that, and then it will go around and sand the inside. There we go, so that failed. So we can make an improvement. If we take this leather that's pretty flexible yet smooth, that makes a really good surface for PSA sandpaper to stick to. I'm gonna try CA glue. It's been several months since I made one of these because it's held up, actually probably 2 or so years. It's just held up for a while. If you need leather, ask somebody who does leather work, and they will kind of giggle probably at how little you need. This has lasted me 3 or so years. Chop that up a little bit. Hashtag perfect, not perfect. Now, with it being this wide compared to that hole, it's gonna buckle pretty bad as soon as it goes down there. So to address that, I want this part here to be narrower, and I'm gonna trim down this corner here to reduce the chance of it catching on those wood fibers inside there. So sort of gradually hit that. Gradually apply pressure, like so. And once you do a few of these, you'll get the hang of it really quick about how much extra to have off for the tool you're using. Anyway, so that's what it looks like. That didn't break. It didn't even bind it. Like, it just curved. There's no crease there. So that's good. And then this can peel off of the leather, so we can just put new PSA paper on there. Yet it still held pretty well. Now, it doesn't give a lot of pressure with the size of overhang here. And so it's gonna go in there fairly easy. and sort of self-centers in there, and so that's done. Like, that's smooth. If I wanted to have more of a little bit more of a bevel there, then I'd want this to be a little bit stiffer. I'm gonna go with the little bit longer strip of paper, or a little bit wider here. Same length as the other one, just I'm not gonna cut it down at all. And this should have more resistance as it goes around. It's like by the time I'm getting down in there a little bit farther, it's already giving kind of a nice round over. Oh cool, so that didn't buckle either. So that's a pretty ideal one, because it's still, with the width of this, it's still pressing up against the sides nicely in there. You can be sloppy, you don't have to hit it just perfect center, it'll center itself. Anyway, so that's kind of the concept there. Let's move on to a bigger hole. I don't have this planned out, by the way, in advance. So I have some that are already pre-made, the PSA, so we can do the same thing there, but that won't really teach anything, will it? The squishy is mainly not for holes, it's for spoons. Sort of a side note here. On my spoons, I really like to get them super, super, super smooth so that light reflects really uniformly all over the place. And I use squishy stuff like this to help prevent any sort of ridges from forming in there. Here's one, dowel with a 1/4 inch bolt, some Velcro. That'd do pretty good at doing that little micro bevel thing. Once that paper folded, that actually works. There's a lot of pressure from these little bit wider wings on here, pressing up against the sides. So here's what's going on. I drilled a hole for the bolt to go inside of, epoxied that on there, and then epoxied the hook side of the Velcro on the dowel. This recess is just to kind of make sure that stays stuck there, and the epoxy is just a nice permanent solution. The main thing to watch out for when using this and mounting it securely when using the Velcro is that this is plastic and this will melt and become ineffective, which really stinks if you epoxied it to the dowel. Instead, just put another piece of Velcro on there, because that way, as this heats up and melts and becomes ineffective, I just take that off, pull out my messy Velcro again, cut a new one, and move on. I don't have to remake the whole thing. Now the Velcro is sweet for using the same bit for different size of holes. I think that's good to illustrate this. So this here is providing a lot of resistance on those 4 corners where the sandpaper meets. So that's going to be a pretty nice, quick, aggressive cut. On that size there, and that gave a really, really, really nice little round over sort of thing. Now, a quick note on that is that the more resistance you have, the more likely it is that something's going to come off, especially if you don't have a good glue on there or a good Velcro on there. I'm going to go ahead and hook this up to a die grinder. On my welding cart, I have one of these size of wrenches welded on there, so I can do this with one hand. Way more awesome than this workbench. And that's going pretty quick and providing a little more vibration. I have much more the feeling that this is going to shoot out from underneath the grinder at any point. So like to kind of prevent anything from catching, just take that and round it over on that leading edge, because now it's going to be a lot smoother. As there's not going to be near that resistance since it's only catching in the 2 corners there. All right, now the final thing to sand, this that we used for the washer toss games. I want to make sure that this runs pretty slow. This die grinder here allows finer control over the speed. So basically, to knock down these rough edges for the washer toss games, we just did this.